The caregiver sang softly to the old granny, unaware he Millionaire's son was watching and change her life. Welcome to Dusk Tales. Let's uncover what really happened. The sterile, white-walled silence of the Oakwood Senior Care Facility was a sound Clara knew intimately. It was a silence filled with unspoken memories, the faint, lingering scent of antiseptic and the quiet, ticking clock of lives winding down. For 3 years, Clara had been a caregiver here, a ghost of comfort moving through the hushed hallways. Her own life, a quiet melody of compassion in a world that often seemed to have none. She was a woman woven from a fabric of quiet strength and unyielding empathy. Her days a cycle of gentle tasks. Fluffing pillows, spoon-feeding meals, and offering a warm hand to hold in the long, lonely hours of the night. Her life was small, contained, her dreams carefully folded away like the clean linens she stacked in the closets. Her world was defined by the needs of her residents, by the quiet satisfaction of bringing a small measure of comfort to those in the twilight of their lives. Her most cherished resident was Eleanor Vance, a woman whose body had been betrayed by time, but whose spirit, on good days, still flickered with a fierce, intelligent light. Eleanor was mostly nonverbal now, her memories a tangled, inaccessible garden. But Clara had found a key, a secret language that seemed to bypass the fog of her dementia. It was music. Clara had a voice, a soft, ethereal soprano, a gift she rarely shared with the world. But for Eleanor, she would sing. In the quiet moments, when the facility was still and the other residents were asleep, Clara would sit by Eleanor's bedside and sing the old hymns, the forgotten folk songs, the lullabies of a bygone era. She sang not for applause, but for the flicker of recognition in Eleanor's eyes, the faint, almost imperceptible smile that would sometimes grace her lips. It was a secret, sacred ritual, a communion of two souls in a place where connection was a precious, fleeting commodity. The facility was ruled by a different kind of authority, Mrs. Davis, the head administrator. Mrs. Davis was a woman who saw the world not in terms of human connection, but in spreadsheets and profit margins. She was a master of the corporate smile, a thin, brittle thing that never reached her cold, calculating eyes. To her, residents were clients, caregivers were human resources, and compassion was an inefficient, unbillable expense. She saw Clara's quiet dedication not as a virtue, but as a liability, a waste of time that could be better spent on more productive tasks. Clara, she'd say, her voice a sharp, professional staccato. Your primary function is to adhere to the schedule. We are running a business, not a charity concert. Please remember that. Her words were a constant, chilling reminder of the cold, transactional reality of the world she inhabited. But Clara persisted, her quiet rebellion a daily act of defiance against the soulless efficiency of the facility. She knew that her small acts of kindness, her whispered songs, were the only things that truly mattered, the only things that could pierce the veil of loneliness and fear that surrounded so many of her residents. Unbeknownst to Clara, her quiet, sacred ritual was about to be interrupted by a force she could never have anticipated. Eleanor Vance was not just a forgotten old woman in a sterile room. She was the matriarch of a vast, powerful family, a woman whose influence had once shaped the very fabric of the city. Her son, Julian Vance, was a man of immense wealth and power, a titan of industry who had built a global empire from the ground up. He was a man who lived in a world of private jets, high-stakes negotiations, and a level of influence that was almost unimaginable. He was also a man haunted by a deep, profound guilt. His mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything for him, now languished in a facility he rarely visited, his life a whirlwind of travel and business that left little room for the quiet, difficult work of filial devotion. He paid for the best, the most expensive care, but he knew, in his heart, that it was a poor substitute for his own presence. One rainy Tuesday evening, driven by a sudden, sharp pang of guilt, Julian made an unscheduled, unannounced visit to Oakwood. He slipped in through a side entrance, hoping to avoid the cloying, performative fuss of Mrs. Davis and her staff. He wanted to see his mother as she truly was, to confront the reality of his own neglect. He walked down the hushed, sterile hallway, the silence a stark, accusatory thing. As he approached his mother's room, he heard a sound so unexpected, so out of place in the sterile silence, that it stopped him in his tracks. It was a woman's voice, singing softly, a melody so pure, so full of a heartbreaking, gentle compassion that it seemed to fill the entire hallway with a warm, golden light. It was a sound of such profound, unadulterated love that it pierced through the layers of his own carefully constructed emotional armor, hitting him with the force of a physical blow. He stood in the shadows of the hallway, his hand frozen on the doorknob, listening, his heart a tight, aching knot in his chest. He was a man who could buy anything, control anything, command anything. But he knew, with a sudden, devastating clarity, that the one thing his mother truly needed, the one thing that truly mattered, was something his vast fortune could never purchase: the simple, profound, and utterly priceless gift of a human heart. And he was standing on the outside, a stranger in his own mother's life, listening to a hired caregiver provide the very comfort he had failed to give. Julian stood in the dimly lit hallway, a ghost in his own mother's life, his carefully constructed world of power and influence reduced to a single, agonizing moment of profound inadequacy. The voice from his mother's room, a soft, ethereal soprano, was a sound of such pure, unadulterated love that it felt like a judgment on his own long absence. He was a man accustomed to commanding boardrooms, to moving markets, to shaping the very destinies of companies and countries. But here, in this quiet, sterile hallway, he was just a failed son, listening to a stranger provide the very solace he had outsourced. He pushed the door open a crack, his movements slow, cautious, unwilling to break the sacred spell of the moment. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from a small bedside lamp that cast a warm, golden glow on the two figures within. His mother, Eleanor, lay in her bed, her face, usually a mask of vacant confusion, now softened, her eyes, though still clouded, holding a flicker of something akin to peace. And sitting beside her, holding her frail, wrinkled hand, was a young woman, a caregiver in a simple, practical uniform. It was Clara. Her head was bowed slightly, her eyes closed, her entire being focused on the song she was singing. It was an old lullaby, one Julian hadn't heard since his own childhood, a melody his mother used to sing to him when he was a small, frightened boy. The sound of it, so unexpected, so filled with a bittersweet nostalgia, was a key that unlocked a flood of forgotten memories, of a time before the empire, before the guilt, before the long, lonely years of his self-imposed exile. He watched, unseen, as Clara finished her song, her voice trailing off into a soft, gentle hum. She stroked his mother's hand, her touch filled with a tenderness that was both beautiful and heartbreaking to witness. He saw the way his mother's hand, usually so still, seemed to grip Clara's in response, a silent, powerful connection that transcended words, that transcended the fog of her dementia. A wave of profound, gut-wrenching shame washed over Julian. He paid for this. He wrote the checks, but he had never truly understood what he was paying for. He had assumed it was a transaction, a service rendered. But this was not a service. This was an act of pure, unadulterated love, offered freely, generously, in the quiet, unseen moments when no one was watching. Just then, the door to the room swung open with a sharp, officious creak, shattering the fragile peace. Mrs. Davis, the head administrator, stood in the doorway, her face a mask of stern disapproval. She had clearly been doing her nightly rounds, her clipboard a weapon of corporate authority. Her eyes, cold and sharp, immediately zeroed in on Clara, her expression a mixture of annoyance and contempt. "Clara," she said, her voice a sharp, professional staccato that cut through the quiet room like a shard of glass. "What are you doing? Your shift ended 10 minutes ago. And what is this? A private concert? I thought I made myself clear. We are running a professional care facility, not a music hall. This is not part of your duties. This is a waste of company time. Clara flinched, her face flushing with a mixture of embarrassment and indignation. She gently released Eleanor's hand and stood up, her posture suddenly defensive. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Davis," she began, her voice a quiet, respectful murmur. "I was just—" Mrs. Vance was agitated. "The music calms her." Mrs. Davis let out a short, derisive laugh. "Calms her? Or entertains you? Clara, I've warned you about this. Your emotional attachments are unprofessional. Your primary function is to adhere to the schedule, to complete your assigned tasks. Singing lullabies is not on the list. Now clock out and go home. And I will be noting this unprofessional conduct in your personnel file. Another incident like this, and we will have to reevaluate your position here at Oakwood." The threat, thinly veiled but unmistakable, hung in the air, a cold, chilling promise of retribution. Clara simply nodded, her eyes downcast, a look of quiet, resigned defeat on her face. Julian, still hidden in the shadows of the hallway, felt a surge of pure, unadulterated fury. He had witnessed an act of profound, beautiful compassion, and he had just seen it dismissed, belittled, and threatened by a woman who saw human connection as a line item on a budget. The quiet, unassuming caregiver had shown his mother more love in the past 10 minutes than he had in the past 10 years. And this was how she was treated. The contrast between Clara's selfless devotion and Mrs. Davis's callous, corporate cruelty was a stark, undeniable indictment of the very system he had entrusted with his mother's care. He had paid for the best, and he had gotten a prison run by a petty tyrant. A cold, steely resolve began to form in Julian's heart. He was done being a ghost. He was done being a failed son. He had seen the truth, and he was about to unleash the full, devastating force of his power, not just to protect the quiet caregiver who had unknowingly shamed him, but to fundamentally reshape the world she inhabited. Mrs. Davis had just made the biggest mistake of her professional life. She had underestimated the quiet caregiver, and she had no idea that the silent, powerful son of her most prominent client was watching, listening, and preparing to bring her entire, soulless world crashing down. Julian stepped out of the shadows, his presence in the sterile hallway suddenly filling the space with an immense, unspoken authority. His face, usually a mask of practiced, boardroom calm, was now etched with a cold, quiet fury. Mrs. Davis, her back to him, was still delivering her parting shot to Clara, her voice filled with a smug, self-satisfied superiority. "And Clara," she was saying, "I expect you to focus on efficiency from now on. Less singing, more sanitizing. Understood?" "I understand completely, Mrs. Davis," a new voice said, a low, powerful baritone that resonated with a chilling, absolute authority. Mrs. Davis froze, her head snapping around, her face a mask of pure, incredulous shock as she saw Julian Vance standing in the doorway. Her professional smile, usually so readily deployed, faltered, her jaw going slack. Her eyes, which had been so sharp and dismissive moments before, now widened with a dawning, horrified recognition. "Mr. Vance," she stammered, her voice a reedy, panicked whisper. I didn't know you were here. You should have called. We would have prepared." "Prepared what, Mrs. Davis?" Julian interjected, his voice dangerously quiet. "Prepared a better performance? A more convincing facade of compassion? I assure you, I have seen all the performance I need to see for one evening." He walked slowly into the room, his gaze sweeping over the sterile, impersonal decor, the state-of-the-art medical equipment, all the expensive, meaningless trappings of a professional care facility. His eyes then settled on Clara, who was standing by the bed, her face a mixture of confusion and a dawning, terrified apprehension. She had no idea who he was, only that he was a man of immense power, a man who had just witnessed her being reprimanded. He then turned his full, unblinking attention back to Mrs. Davis, his eyes, the same piercing blue as his mother's, now glinting with a cold, steely fire. "I have just had the privilege of witnessing a truly remarkable display of unprofessional conduct, he said, his voice laced with a bitter, biting sarcasm. I witnessed a caregiver on her own time, offering a moment of profound, human comfort to a woman who has been lost in the fog of her own mind for years. I witnessed an act of selfless, compassionate care that no amount of money could ever buy. And then I witnessed you, the head administrator of this establishment, belittle that compassion, threaten that caregiver, and reduce an act of pure, unadulterated love to a waste of company time. Mrs. Davis's face, already pale, took on a greenish tint. She opened her mouth to speak, to explain, to defend, but no words came out. She was trapped, exposed, her petty tyranny laid bare before the one man whose opinion truly mattered, the one man who held her entire professional world in the palm of his hand. Let me be perfectly clear, Mrs. Davis, Julian continued, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. You're not running a business. You are entrusted with the care of human souls, souls like my mother's, and you have failed, spectacularly. He took a step closer, his towering presence seeming to shrink the already small room. You spoke of reevaluating Clara's position. Allow me to reevaluate yours. As of this moment, you are suspended, effective immediately. A full, independent audit of this facility's finances, its policies, and its treatment of its residents will begin tomorrow morning. My legal team will be here at 8 a.m. I suggest you cooperate fully. The words hit Mrs. Davis with the force of physical blow. Her career, her carefully constructed world of corporate authority, was crumbling around her. She stared at Julian, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He then turned to Clara, and the transformation in his demeanor was instantaneous, startling. The cold, ruthless titan of industry vanished, replaced by a man whose eyes were filled with a profound, almost painful gratitude. And you, he said, his voice now soft, almost gentle. You are Clara, correct? Clara, still stunned, could only nod. Clara, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. I don't have the words to express my gratitude. You gave my mother a gift tonight that I have failed to give her for years. You gave her a piece of her soul back. And for that, I am in your debt. A debt I fully intend to repay. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been utterly, spectacularly reversed. The quiet, unassuming caregiver, who had been on the verge of being fired, was now the most important person in the room. And the powerful, tyrannical administrator was now a disgraced, pathetic figure, facing the full, devastating force of a son's righteous fury. The quiet, sacred ritual had been interrupted, but in its place, a new, powerful, and long overdue reckoning had begun. The aftermath of Julian's intervention was swift and decisive. Mrs. Davis, stripped of her authority and facing a full-scale investigation into her administration, was escorted from the facility, her face a mask of shocked, humiliated disbelief. The staff, who had for so long operated under her reign of fear and apathetic efficiency, were now confronted with a new, unshakable reality. The man who paid the bills was finally paying attention, and he was not pleased. Julian, true to his word, unleashed the full force of his immense resources. A team of top-tier auditors and legal experts descended upon Oakwood the next morning, their presence a clear, unambiguous message that the old way of doing things was over. They began a meticulous top-to-bottom review of every aspect of the facility's operations, from its financial records to its staffing policies, its patient care protocols to its very mission statement. The audit quickly uncovered a hornet's nest of systemic issues. Under Mrs. Davis's leadership, the facility had been run not as a haven for the elderly, but as a lean, profit-driven machine. Staffing levels were kept at the bare minimum to cut costs, leading to overworked, underpaid caregivers and a general atmosphere of neglect. Resources that should have been allocated to patient comfort and enrichment programs were instead diverted to executive bonuses and cosmetic upgrades designed to impress potential clients. The facility, despite its high price tag, was a gilded cage, a place where the human soul was treated as a secondary concern to the bottom line. Clara, meanwhile, found her life turned upside down in the most unexpected and overwhelming way. She was no longer just a caregiver. She was a witness, a consultant, a key figure in the restructuring of the entire facility. Julian, recognizing her innate compassion and her deep, intuitive understanding of what the residents truly needed, insisted that she be involved in every step of the process. He met with her daily, not as a powerful titan of industry talking to a low-level employee, but as a grateful son seeking the wisdom of a woman who possessed a knowledge his vast fortune could not buy. "Clara," he would say, his voice filled with a sincere, humble respect, "tell me what needs to change. Tell me what my mother needs. Tell me what they all need." At first, Clara was overwhelmed, intimidated by the sudden, immense responsibility. She was a caregiver, a singer of lullabies, not a corporate reformer. But as she saw the genuine, desperate sincerity in Julian's eyes, she found her voice. She spoke of the need for more staff, for better training, for a culture that prioritized human connection over sterile efficiency. She spoke of the importance of music, of art, of simple, human touch. She spoke of the need to see the residents not as clients, but as individuals, each with a unique story, a unique soul. Julian listened, his pen flying across his notepad, his mind, usually focused on mergers and acquisitions, now absorbed in a new, far more important kind of bottom line, the well-being of his mother and her fellow residents. He didn't just listen, he acted. On Clara's recommendation, he funded the creation of a new, state-of-the-art music and art therapy program. He hired a team of dedicated recreational therapists. He doubled the caregiving staff, ensuring that every resident received the kind of personalized, compassionate attention that Clara had provided out of the goodness of her own heart. He established a new, independent oversight committee, with Clara as a paid, permanent member, to ensure that the facility's new, human-centric mission would never again be compromised. But Julian's gratitude went far beyond professional recognition. He was a man who understood the concept of debt, and he felt he owed Clara a debt that could never truly be repaid. He learned of her own quiet struggles, of her modest apartment, of the dream she had long since set aside to care for others. And he was determined to change that. One afternoon, after a particularly productive meeting, he handed her an envelope. "Clara," he said, his voice quiet, "this is not charity. This is a bonus, a signing bonus, if you will, for your new role as a consultant to the Vance Foundation. It's also a thank you from a son who was lost and is now, finally, trying to find his way home." Clara opened the envelope, her hands trembling. Inside was a check, a cashier's check, for an amount so staggering, so life-altering, that she felt a wave of dizziness. It was enough to buy a house, to travel the world, to live a life free from financial worry for the rest of her days. The tears that welled in her eyes were not just tears of gratitude, but of a profound, overwhelming disbelief. The quiet, unassuming caregiver, who had sought only to bring a small measure of comfort to a lonely old woman, had just had her entire life transformed by a single, quiet act of kindness, an act that had been witnessed by the one person in the world who had the power to truly repay it. The changes at Oakwood Senior Care were not just cosmetic. They were seismic, a fundamental restructuring of the facility's very soul. The cold, sterile institution, once run on the principles of a lean, profit-driven corporation, was transformed into a vibrant, compassionate community, a true haven for its residents. The walls, once a stark, institutional white, were now painted in warm, cheerful colors. The hallways, once silent and foreboding, were now filled with the sound of music, of laughter, of life. The new music and art therapy program, funded by Julian's foundation and guided by Clara's intuitive wisdom, became the heart of the facility. A grand piano was installed in the main common room, its keys, once silent, now brought to life by visiting musicians and even some of the more able-bodied residents. An art studio was created, filled with paints, clay, and looms, a place where forgotten talents were rediscovered and new passions were ignited. The residents, who had once been left to languish in their rooms, were now engaged, stimulated, and connected. Clara, in her new role as a consultant and a permanent member of the Oversight Committee, flourished. She was a natural leader, her quiet strength and unwavering empathy earning her the respect and admiration of the new staff. She worked tirelessly to ensure that the changes were not just superficial, but deeply ingrained in the facility's culture. She trained the new caregivers, not just in the practical aspects of their jobs, but in the art of human connection, in the importance of a gentle touch, a kind word, a whispered song. She became the conscience of Oakwood, a constant reminder of its new, human-centric mission. Julian, for his part, underwent his own profound transformation. The guilt that had haunted him for years began to recede, replaced by a new, active sense of purpose. He became a regular, familiar presence at Oakwood, not as a powerful benefactor, but as a son. He spent hours by his mother's bedside, holding her hand, talking to her, reading to her, and sometimes even trying to sing the old lullabies he now remembered with a bittersweet clarity. His mother, surrounded by love, by music, by a new, vibrant energy, seemed to respond. The flicker of recognition in her eyes became more frequent, her smiles more genuine. She was still lost in the fog of her dementia, but now, it seemed, there were more and more moments when the sun broke through the clouds. The bond between Julian and Clara deepened, evolving from one of benefactor and beneficiary to one of genuine friendship, a shared partnership built on a foundation of mutual respect and a common goal. They were an unlikely pair, the titan of industry and the quiet caregiver. But together, they were a formidable force for good. Clara, with the life-altering check Julian had given her, did not buy a mansion or travel the world. She bought a small, comfortable house near the facility, a place with a garden where she could plant flowers, a quiet sanctuary where she could finally rest. And she established a small, private foundation of her own, a scholarship fund for aspiring young musicians who, like her, came from humble beginnings, ensuring that her own good fortune would be paid forward, that her own quiet song would be amplified in the voices of others. One sunny afternoon, months after the dramatic changes at Oakwood, Julian was sitting by his mother's bedside, humming an old folk song, his voice a little off-key but filled with love. His mother was asleep, her breathing peaceful, a faint smile on her lips. Clara entered the room, a tray with 2 cups of tea in her hands. She smiled at the scene, a quiet, knowing look in her eyes. "You have a good voice, Mr. Vance," she said softly. Julian looked up, a self-deprecating smile on his face. "Not as good as yours, Clara. Never as good as yours." He paused, his gaze drifting to his mother's peaceful face. "You know," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide, "I used to think that power was about controlling things, about building empires, about winning. But you taught me something, Clara. You taught me that true power, the only power that really matters, is the power to bring comfort to another human soul. It's the power of a gentle hand, a kind word, a quiet song in the dark." Clara sat down beside him, her presence a familiar, comforting warmth. They sat in a companionable silence, 2 people from vastly different worlds, brought together by a shared act of love, their lives forever intertwined by a single, quiet song. The narrator's voice comes in, full of warmth and inspiration. It is a story that reminds us that in a world that often values profit over people, the currency of human kindness is a treasure beyond measure. Clara, a woman who sought only to bring a small measure of comfort to the forgotten, discovered that her quiet acts of compassion had a power she never could have imagined. And Julian, a man who had everything the world could offer, learned that the most valuable things in life cannot be bought, but must be earned through love, through presence, through the simple, profound act of caring for another. Their story is a testament to the fact that even the quietest of songs can shatter the loudest of silences, that a single, gentle voice can awaken a sleeping heart, and that the most powerful force in the universe is, and always will be, the unwavering, transformative, and utterly priceless power of a human soul reaching out to another in the dark. The transformation of Oakwood was not just a local story. It became a national model for compassionate, person-centered elder care. The Vance Foundation, under Julian's direction and with Clara's invaluable guidance, began to fund similar initiatives across the country, creating a ripple effect of positive change that extended far beyond the walls of a single facility. Julian, the ruthless titan of industry, had found a new, more meaningful bottom line: the well-being of the most vulnerable members of society. His vast fortune, once a tool for acquiring power, was now a force for good, a testament to the profound, life-altering impact of his mother's quiet suffering and Clara's quiet compassion. The legal and professional fallout for Mrs. Davis was swift and severe. The independent audit uncovered not just a culture of neglect, but a pattern of financial mismanagement and a callous disregard for state regulations. She was fired, her professional licenses were revoked, and she faced a series of civil lawsuits from the families of other residents who, inspired by the changes at Oakwood, now felt empowered to speak out against the years of substandard care they had endured. Her reign of corporate tyranny had ended not with a whimper, but with a resounding public crash. Clara, though now financially secure and in a position of significant influence, remained grounded, her spirit untouched by the trappings of wealth or power. She continued to work at Oakwood, not as a paid consultant, but as a volunteer, a friend, a familiar, comforting presence to the residents who had become her extended family. She still sang to Eleanor, their quiet, sacred ritual now a celebrated, cherished part of the facility's daily life. Other caregivers, inspired by her example, began to share their own hidden talents, their own quiet gifts, transforming the facility into a vibrant, living community. One evening, as Clara was sitting by Eleanor's bedside, singing a soft, familiar lullaby, Eleanor's eyes, usually so clouded, suddenly cleared. She looked directly at Clara, a flicker of profound recognition, of deep, lucid understanding in their depths. Her lips, which had been silent for so long, parted. "My dear girl," she whispered, her voice a faint, raspy echo of her former self. "You have an angel's voice." The words, so unexpected, so clear, so filled with a love that had been trapped for years behind the veil of her dementia, were a gift more precious than any check, any foundation, any public recognition. Tears streamed down Clara's face as she squeezed Eleanor's hand, her heart overflowing with a joy so profound it was almost painful. "I know, Eleanor," she whispered back, her voice choked with emotion. "I know." A few weeks later, Eleanor Vance passed away peacefully in her sleep, her face serene, a faint, contented smile on her lips. Her memorial service, held in the sun-drenched gardens of the newly transformed Oakwood, was not a somber affair, but a celebration of a life well lived, a life that had, even in its final, silent chapter, managed to inspire a profound, lasting change. Julian, his voice thick with emotion, delivered a moving eulogy, not just for his mother, but for the quiet, unassuming caregiver who had taught him the true meaning of love and devotion. "My mother's greatest legacy," he said, his gaze finding Clara in the crowd, "is not the empire I built, but the simple, powerful truth that she and Clara taught me, that the measure of a life is not in what we acquire, but in what we give. And the greatest gift we can ever offer is the quiet, unwavering comfort of a compassionate heart." Clara, at Julian's request, sang at the service. Her voice, a pure, soaring soprano, filled the air, a melody of hope, of love, of a life that had, against all odds, made a profound, lasting difference. It was a voice that had once been a secret, a quiet whisper in the dark. Now, it was a testament, a legacy, a song of redemption for a son, a caregiver, and an entire community. The narrator's voice comes in, full of warmth and inspiration. It is a story that reminds us that even in the most sterile, forgotten corners of our world, where life seems to be winding down, the potential for profound, life-altering connection still exists. It teaches us that the smallest acts of kindness, the ones performed with no expectation of reward, can have the most extraordinary, far-reaching consequences. Clara's quiet song, offered freely from a heart full of compassion, did not just bring comfort to a lonely old woman. It awakened a son, it transformed a community, and it created a ripple effect of positive change that will be felt for generations to come. Her journey is a powerful testament to the fact that true wealth is not found in bank accounts, but in the richness of the human heart, and that the most valuable thing any of us can ever possess is the simple, profound, and utterly transformative power to care. The legacy of Eleanor Vance and the quiet compassion of Clara continued to resonate long after the initial storm of change had settled. The Oakwood Senior Care Facility, now renamed the Eleanor Vance Residence, became a beacon of compassionate care, a place where the elderly were not just housed, but honored, their lives celebrated, their stories cherished. The model of care they had pioneered, one that prioritized human connection and emotional well-being over sterile efficiency, was adopted by other facilities across the country, creating a new, more humane standard for elder care. Julian Vance, forever changed by his experience, dedicated the rest of his life to philanthropy, using his immense resources to fund programs that supported the most vulnerable members of society. He became a passionate advocate for reform, a powerful voice for those who had been silenced by poverty, by age, by a system that had forgotten their humanity. His relationship with Clara remained a constant, a deep, abiding friendship built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared purpose. They were an unlikely but formidable team, the quiet caregiver and the powerful titan of industry, their combined strengths creating a force for good that was truly unstoppable. Clara, though she now had the means to live any life she chose, remained deeply connected to the residents of the Eleanor Vance residence. She continued to sing, her voice a familiar, comforting presence in the hallways, a symbol of the love and compassion that now defined the facility's culture. She also used her newfound resources to pursue her own long-forgotten dreams. She endowed a music scholarship at the local community college, ensuring that other young, aspiring musicians would have the opportunity to share their gifts with the world. She traveled, not to luxury resorts, but to small, forgotten communities, sharing her story, her music, and her message of hope and compassion. She became a quiet, unassuming force for good in the world, her life a testament to the fact that one small, kind act can have a profound, lasting impact. One sunny afternoon, years later, Clara was sitting in the gardens of the Eleanor Vance residence, a new generation of residents listening intently as she sang a familiar, old hymn. A young woman, a new caregiver, approached her, her eyes shining with a mixture of admiration and awe. "Ms. Clara," the young woman said, her voice hesitant, "your voice, it's so beautiful. How did you learn to sing like that?" Clara smiled, a warm, knowing expression on her face. She looked out at the vibrant, happy community around her, at the faces of the residents, filled with a peace and a dignity that had once been so absent. She thought of Eleanor, of Julian, of the incredible, unexpected journey her life had taken. "I didn't learn," she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet, profound gratitude. I just listened. I listened to what the heart needed to hear. And then I sang." Her words, simple and true, hung in the air, a perfect, beautiful melody, a testament to a life that had been transformed by the quiet, unassuming, and utterly extraordinary power of a single, compassionate song. The narrator's voice comes in, full of warmth and a final, uplifting message. So, the next time you encounter a moment of quiet suffering, a soul in need of comfort, remember the story of Clara and her quiet song. Remember that you, too, possess a power that is more valuable than any fortune, more influential than any position. It is the power of a kind heart, a gentle voice, a compassionate soul. And you never know. The quiet song you sing today might just be the one that changes a life, that heals a family, that transforms a community, and in doing so, changes the world. For in the end, it is not the grand gestures that define us, but the small, quiet acts of love that echo through eternity. The story of Clara and Julian became a quiet legend in the town of Havenwood, a testament to the unexpected ways in which lives can intertwine and transform. The Eleanor Vance residence, once a sterile symbol of corporate indifference, was now a vibrant, thriving community, a place where laughter echoed in the hallways and music was a constant, comforting presence. It stood as a living monument to the profound, lasting change that a single act of kindness could inspire. Julian, no longer the distant, guilt-ridden son, found a new, more fulfilling purpose in his life. He continued to manage his vast business empire, but his focus had shifted. He now saw his wealth not as an end in itself, but as a tool, a means to create a more just and compassionate world. He became a leading voice in the movement for elder care reform. His personal story and his deep, abiding respect for Clara, lending an undeniable authenticity to his advocacy. He used his platform to challenge the soulless, profit-driven models that had dominated the industry, pushing for a new paradigm based on dignity, respect, and human connection. He never forgot the lesson he had learned in that quiet, dimly lit room, that the true measure of a man is not in what he builds, but in how he cares for the most vulnerable among us. Clara, for her part, remained the heart and soul of the Eleanor Vance residence. She turned down numerous offers to pursue a professional singing career, choosing instead to share her gift where she felt it was needed most. Her voice, once a secret, private solace, was now a public, celebrated source of comfort and joy. She trained a new generation of caregivers, not just in the practical skills of their profession, but in the art of empathy, in the profound, healing power of a compassionate presence. She taught them to see beyond the physical needs of their residents, to see the stories, the memories, the vibrant souls that still resided within their frail bodies. Her life, once so small and contained, had expanded in ways she could never have imagined. The scholarship fund she had established had helped dozens of young, aspiring musicians from underprivileged backgrounds pursue their dreams, creating a ripple effect of hope and opportunity that extended far beyond the confines of Havenwood. She had become a quiet, unassuming matriarch in her own right, her life a testament to the fact that true influence is not about commanding attention, but about inspiring love. Years later, on a warm spring afternoon, a young, ambitious journalist came to Havenwood to do a follow-up story on the miracle at Oakwood. He found Clara in the gardens of the Eleanor Vance residence, sitting on a bench, surrounded by residents, a small, worn hymnal in her hands. He watched as she led them in a soft, gentle chorus, her voice, though now tinged with the wisdom of age, still as pure and as resonant as it had been on that fateful night so many years ago. After the song, the journalist approached her, his notebook in hand. "Ms. Vance," he began, his voice filled with a sincere, professional respect. "Your story is incredible. You went from being an anonymous caregiver to a celebrated philanthropist, a catalyst for national reform. Looking back, what do you consider to be your greatest accomplishment?" Clara smiled, a warm, knowing expression on her face. She looked at the faces of the residents around her, at the vibrant, happy community she had helped to build. She thought of Julian, of Eleanor, of the incredible, unexpected journey her life had taken. "My greatest accomplishment," she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet, profound gratitude. "My greatest accomplishment was never giving up on the power of a simple song. It was in knowing that even in the quietest, most forgotten corners of the world, a single act of love can make a difference." Her words, simple and true, hung in the air, a perfect, beautiful melody, a testament to a life that had been defined not by what she had gained, but by what she had given. The narrator's voice comes in, full of warmth and a final, uplifting message. So, the next time you encounter a moment of quiet suffering, a soul in need of comfort, remember the story of Clara and her quiet song. Remember that you, too, possess a power that is more valuable than any fortune, more influential than any position. It is the power of a kind heart, a gentle voice, a compassionate soul. And you never know. The quiet song you sing today might just be the one that changes a life, that heals a family, that transforms a community, and in doing so, changes the world. For in the end, it is not the grand gestures that define us, but the small, quiet acts of love that echo through eternity, proving that kindness is the one investment that always pays the most beautiful, life-altering dividends.